Very excited to be joined once again on the program by the host of the Thom Hartmann program, as well as the author of the just released The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, Thom Hartmann. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Hey, John, it's great to be here with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Always glad to have you here. This is the latest in a series of books that you've written. And if people are interested in seeing our talks on previous installments, we've covered the last several, but this time you're taking on not guns or the Supreme Court. You're going for American oligarchy. Seems pretty relevant right now. How did you choose the topic for this most recent book?
Well, it's sort of the bookend. The last book that I wrote was the hidden history of monopoly in the United States. Mm-hmm. And monopoly is where economic power is concentrated in a very small number of hands, which is very much how our economy is run now. The political equivalent of monopoly is oligarchy, where political power is concentrated in a small number of hands, typically very, very wealthy hands. And we also have that. And in fact, I would argue, as would Matthew Gillens and Benjamin Page of Princeton and Northwestern universities, who did a study on this, that basically in the last 20 years or so, our form of government has morphed from small d democracy into oligarchy. They did this survey, which is fairly well known now, where they found that prior to the Reagan Revolution, what public opinion polls showed the majority of Americans wanted as legislative policy actually happened. Medicare, Medicaid, civil rights, voting rights, long-term unemployment insurance, clean up the air, clean up the water, all of it, control predatory corporations, have a good, strong minimum wage. All that stuff in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s actually got made into law. And then Reagan came along and said, screw that, we're gonna dance to the tune of the rich people. And in part because of a couple of Supreme Court decisions in 76 and 78 that legalized billionaires and corporations owning politicians. And so when you look at the exact same metrics in the 1990s, mid 1990s, right through today, their study was actually in 2014, but up to then, what they found was the probability of what average people want, like over 70% of average people want, being translated into legislation is roughly equivalent to random noise. There is no longer any correlation. But what the top 3% want is routinely, well over 50 or 60%, routinely translated into legislation, whether it's Trump's tax cuts or whether it's the so-called penal system reform, judicial, I forget the exact phrase that they used, criminal justice reform, I think it was, which actually just incorporated this mens rea thing to make it harder to prosecute CEOs when their companies kill people. I mean, that was the essence of it. Yeah. So wow, it's a mess.
And look, obviously, I want to talk about the current state, how we've got to here, but the part that kind of surprises me a little bit is, so prior to the Reagan Revolution, were the rich having a difficult time getting what they wanted out of politics? I mean, I get that it's getting worse, but it seems like why was it more difficult for them then? I mean, many of our presidents and elected officials themselves are very wealthy. Is it more of a thing where just the interests of the poor, working class, middle class are dropping off? Or was it prior to there, it actually difficult for the rich to get, for instance, decreases in taxes, those sorts of things?
Right. It was a combination of law and societal norms. When Richard Nixon ran against Jack Kennedy and lost back in 1960, and did his, you won't have me to kick around anymore, the infamous Checkers speech, he pointed out that his wife doesn't own a fur coat, she wears a cloth coat. And the little dog that they have was given to them. In other words, he was saying, I'm not rich, I don't serve the rich. That was what people wanted from politicians, is what they expected from politicians. The Tillman Act, which Teddy Roosevelt had passed in 1907, was still being aggressively enforced. It made it a federal felony for any person in any corporation, on behalf of the corporation, to give any money or other thing of value to any political campaign for federal office. And so, you had law constraining giant corporations and the rich, as well as this cultural norm, plus the top tax rate when Nixon was around, and throughout the Nixon administration, throughout the Ford administration, throughout the Carter administration, was 91%. And that's why the average CEO prior to the 1980s took about, at the maximum, 30 times what their lowest paid employee did, because beyond that, they'd move into a tax bracket where it was basically confiscatory. So, they left the money in their companies, they paid their people well. And also, during that period from 1940 until 1982, the middle class was growing faster in terms of both wealth and the accumulated sum of everything they owned, their home, their car, their whatever, and income was growing faster than was the top 5%. The top 5% was still doing fine, but they were actually not getting richer as fast as the middle class was. Reagan completely flipped that upside down when he dropped that top tax rate from the 74% that LBJ had set it at in 1967. He dropped it down to 25%, and all hell broke loose. And then on top of that, 4 years earlier, the Supreme Court had legalized political bribery in the Buckley case, and then corporate bribery in the Bellotti case in 76 and 78, as I mentioned. And that produced this avalanche of money, this tsunami of money that helped bring Ronald Reagan into office in 1980 and continues to haunt us to this day. The court doubled down on that with Citizens United in 2010. Unanimous among the conservatives, unanimously opposed by the liberals on the court.
That's really interesting because obviously you're tying this back to a particular time, and you've identified some of the tools. Is this a thing that I sort of vaguely remember the study that you referred to, the 2014 study? Is this a thing where we can see significant differences in how those things have affected the Republican Party as opposed to the Democratic Party, or are we largely seeing similar trends on both sides?
That's a brilliant question, and the answer is really rather remarkable. In 1976 and 78, when the Supreme Court said, okay, fine, it's okay to own politicians, the Republican Party said, great, we'll take the money. Give us the rich people, give us the corporations. They'd always been kind of in bed with them, but it was more the Main Street, businesses. In fact, Republicans used to refer to them as Main Street politicians to themselves. But the GOP said, okay, we'll take all this money. And like I said, that brought Reagan into power. The Democratic Party ignored it. And the reason why is because at that point in time, a third of American workers were unionized. And through their union dues, American working people were supporting the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was awash in cash in 1976, 78. And it was almost all union cash. In fact, there was so much union cash that a few corrupt union officials like Frank Fitzsimmons and Jimmy Hoffa were able to siphon it off. Hoffa used some of that to bribe Richard Nixon. So Reagan's first job when he became president in 1981 was to destroy the funding source for the Democratic Party. His animus against unions, this is a guy who used to be the president of SAG, of the Actors Union. He didn't have a specific animus against unions themselves, but unions were what funded the Democratic Party. And so Reagan set out to destroy that. His first target was Patco. He took them down in 1 week in 1981, in August of 1981. And then, he generalized that, and he put an anti-union guy in charge of the Department of Labor, Ray Donovan. The Supreme Court went along with him with a couple of decisions. And so by 1992, the union money could no longer support a presidential campaign for a Democrat. And so Bill Clinton and Al Fromm got together and created this thing called the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, as basically a vehicle to bring money from billionaires and corporations into the Democratic Party. And the compromise that they made was, okay, we've got to go to these people to get this money, but we'll leave the dirty industries to the Republicans. They can be funded by steel and oil and coal and nuclear waste and stuff like that. We're going to take the clean industries. We'll take insurance. We'll take banking. We'll take tech, and and we'll
clean
this way, right? And Clinton basically sold out the soul of the Democratic Party. But the truth is that Reagan had put him in a position where he had no choice, and arguably because they didn't have the ability to crowdsource money now. So now what Obama proved, and Hillary Clinton proved, and Bernie Sanders in particular proved, and now Joe Biden doubled down on and proved again, is that working people can once again fund a political party. And so now, thank God, about half of the Democratic Party are now in the Progressive Caucus and have now committed to not being taking giant PAC money donations from billionaires and giant corporations. And the other half of the Democratic Party is quickly trying to catch up, learning the lesson of Joe Crowley versus Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So I'm quite optimistic, actually, about the future of both the Democratic Party and the possibility that we can go back to some of those reforms of the 70s that followed in the wake of the Nixon bribery scandals that the Supreme Court blew up in 76 and 78. There are ways around Citizens United, but they require congressional action.
Well, that's certainly one of the areas we're going to be watching for. And anyone watching this that'd like to find out a lot more about this process, the book is The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, Reclaiming Our Democracy from the Ruling Class. As always, Thom Hartmann, we appreciate you taking time out to join us.
John, as always, I'm honored and very happy to be on your program. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.